So I'm with Akbar Ahmed, who's in Washington, and I've known Akbar for many years. Now, Akbar, what is the situation in the US? And in particular, I'm interested in understanding the impact on the Muslim communities of the United States.
Ed, that's a great question, because while we're looking at the Muslim community, and the Muslim community is under the spotlight, President Trump has not been particularly kind to it. There's a Muslim ban in place. He very often makes remarks about Muslims which are sort of negative. But then there's also the remarks and the negativity around other communities. Just literally 2 or 3 days ago at the briefing at the White House, President Trump singled out a Chinese American and was quite rude to her. And when she asked, "Why are you asking me this question?" he said, "Ask China this question about the coronavirus." He's been calling it the Chinese virus. So that creates a kind of focus on the Chinese, and there have been attacks on the Chinese. Early on, as you know, he had called Mexicans murderers and rapists. So because of that, the spotlight is not only on Muslims. That's number one. Number two, Muslims have been responding in a very positive way, and I'm quite impressed by their response. They've been organizing charity groups. They've been going around giving food to the homeless and so on. So it's not like they've been knocked out of the ring and they're in a kind of state of despair. The advocacy groups have been particularly active, CARE and ISNA and so on. I've been involved in some of this interfaith dialogue with the Muslim and Jewish groups.
And of course, the impact on faith communities, not just Muslim, but all faith communities, is restrictions on worship, on prayer, on gatherings. And how's that affecting the Muslim communities of the United States?
It is, as in the UK, the mosques are empty because people have to be very careful, and Muslims here are responding to that, keeping a safe distance, observing the lockdown. I may point out that this is not always the case. I know that in countries like Pakistan, a lot of Muslims still go to prayers, they congregate, and sometimes they simply defy what the government wants them to do. But coming back to the United States, I think, Ed, it's important to understand all this in the context of American society. Americans, as you know, are very positive. They see the world in a very positive light. And this scale and the enormity of what's happening has challenged them like never before. And that has brought out two characteristic American features. One is generosity, charity, which you see a lot of, but also a kind of latent or even blatant racism. So you'll get groups turning up at the Michigan State House with nooses, with swastikas. A man in a KKK hood was seen in California. And there are names like the Michigan governor, the state governor, Democrat, whose people are calling for her assassination. Now that is another aspect, and that of course leads, it's not a healthy aspect, it leads to a lot of depression, isolation, even talk of suicide. So Americans are going through a very critical state where I don't think they're fully understanding, and Muslims of course are part of that.
And of course this polarization, as you're describing, has become more intense, has become deeper. Now you've been living in the States and teaching at the university for 20 years or more. How have things changed over that period? Is this a sudden change, or has this been developing over the last couple of decades?
On one level, a lot of change, very dramatic change, and nothing more than Trump following Obama. On another level, a lot of continuity. So the things I pointed out, this tension between the generous aspect of America and this other racist aspect, that has been ongoing. It's not something created by Trump. People accuse him of that, but it's been there. But what I am seeing is that the young generation, this is my students today rather than 20 years ago, they're very committed to the idea of an open, inclusive America. And I think they're taking the brunt of what is happening. And in that, remarkably, Muslims do better because there's a sense of stability and continuity at the home. They have something to grasp, something to hold on to. And this is a time when I think, Ed, and you as a great teacher and a great spiritual guide yourself, you'll appreciate, it's the time when leaders like you have to be showing people, ordinary people, what is happening, how to move ahead in terms of reflection, meditation, in terms of going into themselves and looking for support from family, from friends, finding some space within yourself to hold on to your inner self. reading your favorite books, laughter, music, your favorite music. I think these lessons are equally important because all the time we hear in the media, the economy, the economy, the economy. And that, of course, only takes you to a certain point and then leaves you alone, leaves your finger, as it were, and you're left alone. So it's critical that guides, the spiritual leaders, as it were, help us through this very difficult time.
So you're talking about humanitarian values of compassion, of kindness, something that all people share. I just wonder what sort of things are going on where there's a collaboration, if you like, between faith communities. You've been committed to the interfaith endeavor your whole life, actually, Akbar. And what's actually happening in the States in terms of that partnership?
Well, that's one of the bright lights, Ed, since we started this, you and I, 20 years ago. There's a lot of interfaith activity. It may not be on a vast scale, but it is there and it's catching momentum. Again, almost every state has a very active interfaith core group, and that involves the faiths. It involves not just the Abrahamic faiths, but non-Abrahamic also. And of course, people of goodwill who do not necessarily believe in one faith or one God or the other. So in that way, I'm hopeful. But I want to emphasize again the enormity of what's happening, the scale of what's happening is enough to throw everything off course. So I'm not even sure that when this is over, I'm sure it will be over, but when it is over, how we as a human civilization, as individual Muslims or Jews or Christian, will respond to it, because we really don't have any answers. This is so unprecedented. So I see the two as locked. I see the Muslim community as locked into this larger picture. And I'm not sure many Muslims are actually thinking along those lines, because they are finding comfort by sticking to the shores, not going into the deep waters, and feeling that here we are, we've got a very secure, strong religion, and it gives us comfort in these difficult times. But there are more difficult times coming. This may be something that Hollywood calls an extinction level event. If that's the case, we need to be prepared for it. And there I come back to my point, only the philosophers, the intellectuals, the spiritual guides can help us prepare for that.
And I wonder if we could end with you actually specifying an example of that from the Muslim tradition. You are, after all, the Ibn Khaldun professor, a great medieval Muslim thinker and scholar. But in Islamic history, and maybe in the history of the subcontinent, there have been moments when vast numbers have been threatened, whether it's by a natural event or whether it's by a man-made event. Is there something that you can refer us to?
Ed, that's a great question. And you refer to Ibn Khaldun, who's one of my heroes, who's a sociologist. But for this, I'll turn to my other hero, and that's Rumi, and your favorite also. Now, Rumi, of course, is born out of a crisis on a similar scale. The Mongols have erupted in the 13th century. They've destroyed world empires. And Rumi has to escape the Mongols from what is now Afghanistan to Iran, and lands up in Turkey. And in the midst of this, you have the other great crisis hitting the Middle East, that's the Crusades. And from that, he evolves an answer. How do you cope with this destruction, the violence, the uprooting, the massacres? And he then discovers this great well, the poetry, the verses, the Sufi sayings of love, of mysticism, of embracing the universe. I think that may contain an answer to what we are seeing now. And I'm seeing too little of that. You see the emphasis entirely on reopening so we can make money again, so we become the richest, the greatest, the most powerful nation in the world. I would like the leaders of America to be emphasizing the relationship between human and human, the relationship between a non-Jew and a Jew, and a Muslim and a non-Muslim, Christian and a non-Christian, and the world beginning to see each other in a different light. That is what Rumi teaches us.
Akbar Ahmed, thank you very much.